Was European colonialism good for the world? It's a question that today feels almost radioactive. Asking it out loud is enough to lose you friends, followers, and perhaps even your academic position. But ask it we must, because ignoring uncomfortable questions doesn't make history go away. If anything, it allows ideology to replace memory. So here's a better version of that question. Was European colonialism, compared to Islamic, Chinese, or indigenous forms of imperial expansion, a net benefit for the modern world? This question sits at the heart of The Case for Colonialism by Bruce Gilley, a political science professor who ignited one of the most violent academic firestorms in recent memory. His argument is bold, revisionist, and, in the eyes of his critics, outright heretical. Gilley dared to say that the dominant view of colonialism as a purely evil, genocidal enterprise is not just simplistic, but historically false. And for that, he paid a heavy price. The original piece was a scholarly article published in 2017 in Third World Quarterly, a respected academic journal. In that article, Gilley made the audacious claim that, in some cases, colonialism was legitimate, beneficial, and even desired by the colonized. He didn't argue that all colonialism was good. He acknowledged the violence, exploitation, and racism that did exist. But he challenged the idea that colonialism was always worse than what came before or after. And that, in some contexts, it may have brought governance, infrastructure, and legal order where chaos reigned. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Academics around the world signed petitions demanding the article be retracted. 15 members of the journal's editorial board resigned. Gilley received death threats. And under enormous pressure, he voluntarily withdrew the article. Not because it had been disproven, but because the outrage became too dangerous. The intellectual gatekeepers had spoken. This kind of question was no longer permitted. But Gilley didn't retreat. Instead, he expanded his thesis into a full-length book, published in 2020 under the same title, The Case for Colonialism. In it, he dives deeper into his argument, providing historical case studies and comparisons with other empires, particularly Islamic ones, to show that European colonialism, while flawed, often created more stable, prosperous, and modernized societies than what existed before. And crucially, that many of the systems inherited from colonial rule, legal codes, universities, bureaucracies, remain the functional core of many post-colonial states today. One of Gilley's most explosive claims is that colonialism was frequently welcomed by segments of the local population. He points to African leaders who appealed to Britain to maintain control because the alternative was civil war, corruption, or tribal tyranny. He highlights cases in Asia and Africa where colonial governments introduced public health systems, railroads, education, and civil service structures that simply did not exist before. In his view, these were not just tools of control, but building blocks of modern nationhood. This doesn't mean Gilley glorifies colonialism. He doesn't. But he insists that we must judge it in context, not as an abstract moral crime, but as a real historical phenomenon that, in many cases, may have outperformed the alternatives. He argues that the current post-colonial narrative, one that portrays all colonial ventures as illegitimate and destructive, blinds us to the fact that some colonial regimes governed better than the post-independent states that replaced them. This is, of course, deeply uncomfortable for those who have built careers and political ideologies around the assumption that colonialism is the original sin of the modern world. To them, Gilley's argument is not just wrong, it's dangerous. It challenges the moral foundation of post-colonial identity. It threatens the sacred victimhood status of formerly colonized peoples. It undermines the narrative of eternal Western guilt. But Gilley goes further. He even suggests that, in certain modern failed states, a form of voluntary, temporary recolonization might be a viable path to stability. He's not advocating for empire building or conquest. He's saying, if a state is failing, if it's mired in civil war, famine, or total corruption, then perhaps shared sovereignty with a competent foreign administration might be more ethical than letting millions suffer. This is perhaps his most dangerous idea because it's forward-looking. It doesn't just reevaluate the past, it dares to offer a politically radioactive solution for the future. And yet, it raises a fair question. What if the current global system, based on absolute decolonization and total national sovereignty, has failed millions of people? Shouldn't we at least be able to discuss that? Critics of Gilley argue that his thesis whitewashes real horrors. The genocide in the Congo under Belgian rule, The brutal repression of uprisings in Kenya, India, and elsewhere, the mass famines caused by colonial economic policies. These are undeniable parts of the colonial legacy, but Gilley doesn't deny them. He argues that to focus exclusively on these events, without acknowledging the functional institutions, the rule of law, the infrastructure, and even the comparative peace that colonial systems sometimes brought, is intellectually dishonest. He also challenges the double standard. Why, he asks, do we not hear similar outrage about Islamic colonialism, which spanned continents for over a millennium, brought slavery, forced conversions, and cultural destruction on a vast scale? Or Mongol imperialism, which wiped out entire cities? Why is only the West expected to wear its history as a permanent stain? The answer, of course, lies in the ideological climate. Since the mid-20th century, anti-colonialism has become not just a political movement, but a cultural religion. In this worldview, colonialism is not a historical episode. It is the root of all global injustice. Western civilization, by extension, is cast not as a beacon of science, law, and reason, but as a machine of oppression. And anyone who suggests otherwise, like Gilley, is treated as a heretic. This matters far beyond academia, because the post-colonial narrative shapes foreign aid, immigration policy, multiculturalism, and the way Western societies see themselves. It fuels the idea that the West has no right to enforce its borders, its laws, or even its cultural norms, because it is, forever, morally indebted to the global South. This guilt narrative disarms nations and distorts policy. Gilley's book is a call to rethink that story. Not to deny the sins of empire, but to place them alongside its achievements. To recognize that colonialism, like all human systems, was a mixture of good and bad, and that it may be time to stop treating it as uniquely evil. History is not a morality play. It's a story of complexity, contradiction, and consequence. And perhaps Gilley's most radical suggestion is this: that asking these questions should not be forbidden. That scholarship, if it is to mean anything, must be allowed to explore unpopular ideas, even those that challenge the dominant moral framework. The case for colonialism is more than a book. It is a test of our intellectual courage. Are we still capable of separating evidence from outrage? Of evaluating arguments without resorting to cancellation? Or have we decided that some truths, even partial ones, are too dangerous to be spoken? That's a question every free society must eventually answer. And how we respond may say more about us than about the empires we condemn. If you found this work valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow and keeps independent content like this alive.